Now we'll turn to our first panel of the afternoon. Our moderator is Sikhan Akpan, and Sikhan is the digital science producer for PBS NewsHour. He's co-creator of ScienceScope, a video series that explores the ins and outs of basic research and innovation. Prior to joining the NewsHour, his work appeared on NPR Science Magazine, Science News, Scientific American, Newsweek, and elsewhere. We're delighted to have Sikhan with us today. Our panelists are Dr. Franz Cordova, who is director of the National Science Foundation, Dr. John Danaher, president of Elsevier Education, Donna Cryer, who is CEO and president of the Global Liver Institute, Al Loretano, who is director of Strategic Technology Partnerships at BD, Dr. Keith Yamamoto, who is with UCSF, who I mentioned earlier, and Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, who is pleased to be with us for part of the discussion today, but we understand Capitol Hill beckons and may have to leave a little bit early, and we understand that. Thank you.
So I just want to start by saying thank you to Research America for this opportunity to moderate this distinguished panel. Most of these people were making significant advances to science, health, and medicine long before I was in Pampers, so I feel very honored to be up here right now. If you hadn't heard, it is an election year, and so I'm excited to spend the next hour talking about taking stock and looking ahead. The plan is to chat for about 50 minutes about the evolution of health research, or research funding in general, the emergence of technologies like CRISPR, the future of healthcare delivery for patients, and the roles for research stakeholders. And then we'll take about 7 minutes to field questions from the audience. So let's start with national research priorities and President Obama. Over the last 8 years, his administration has launched a number of initiatives related to research, health, and medicine. These programs cover everything from the brain to the microbiome. So I have a two-part question. How much progress do we as a nation and the scientific community have to show from these initiatives? And if you had been POTUS, what would you have done differently? Is there an initiative that you would have started, changed, or tweaked? And I actually want to start with Dr. Fauci, and then we can move down the line.
So you wanted to ask me if I would have done anything different than the president did.
That is correct.
So let me just make a couple of comments about that. I think initiatives are really very important because they really stimulate activity that sometimes smolders around but doesn't really essentially concretize and come together in an initiative that really galvanizes people to really push the envelope in various areas. One of the problems that we have been facing with in biomedical research is that we've been dealing with a flat budget essentially for the last 13 or more years. You know, and I see people in the room who were around when we had the doubling of the NIH budget from 1998 to 2003, and then variably speaking, from 2003 until the present time, except for last year, we essentially had no increase. So it's very difficult to make a balance of initiatives which are needed with a support for undifferentiated biomedical research, which serves as the incubator for the initiatives that you're talking about. So what I would think in the future, and this is what Research America is essentially all about, is advocating for biomedical research, that looking forward, we have a balance between initiatives that we essentially designate as an initiative and the fundamental basic biomedical research that'll be the basis for initiatives that'll come along later. So I have a bit of a concern, maybe that's not a popular concern, but I have a bit of a concern when all that we have is initiatives and we don't have a situation where there is enough basic biomedical research to be able to be the incubators for initiatives of the future. So my feeling would be that I think we've done as well as we could have done under very, very serious budgetary constraints. But looking forward, I would like to see that delicate balance between initiatives and the undifferentiated research that is so important to what we do.
Great. Dr. Yamamoto?
I don't differ from what Tony said, but I think that I come at it from a slightly different angle, and that is that echoing Bill Height's comments about Kennedy's challenge to go to the moon. I think if the challenges are important and they are broadly framed broadly enough that they actually include the full range of research, they will intrigue the basic scientists as well as the clinicians, as well as the social and behavioral scientists, as well as the people who are not thought of as being traditionally involved in biomedical research in the case that we're talking about, to get involved. Then I think that what presidential initiatives, federal initiatives can do is to broaden the tent and intrigue others to get involved. And I think that that's what happened clearly with the challenge to go to the moon. At the time, it was very clear that the technologies were not available to be able to do that. The Human Genome Project, the technologies to sequence the human genome were not available. But in fact, the challenges were laid out in such a way that it intrigued those who thought they could get involved, contribute in some way, and add to the possibilities of actually being able to achieve, to meet the challenge. I think that initiatives like that are framed in that broad way can actually broaden the tent, and I think that's what can really serve well. I don't have any particular view that I would have launched different initiatives than the president has. I think that we're very fortunate that we have an administration that thinks about science, in particular about health, in a way that he wants to be able to make this a part of his legacy and be able to contribute in a broad way across society. So I think we're fortunate. And I think that the initiatives that have been enunciated so far are actually of the sort that I'm talking about, that are broad enough that fundamental curiosity-driven scientists can think of ways that they can do something in their realm, pursuing their interests, that can contribute. So I'm hopeful that that sort of thing will continue as we move into the next administration. I think that such efforts will bring transdisciplinary research, will bring in people from other areas, will intrigue scientists across the board, both within and outside of biomedical health, and we'll get the public involved because they will be able, if well enunciated, the challenges will be those that identify with them as well. And so patients and people who don't want to be patients can find ways to be involved as well. And I think that broadening the tent in this way is really important.
Mr. Loretano, how do you approach this from a biotech angle and drug development angle?
So first, before I address that, I'd just like to ask, is anybody in the room here from Google, Microsoft, IBM, Apple? It's a trend. So my responsibilities at the company, and I've been very fortunate to kind of work on what we call the front end of innovation, the front end. So even before ideas are being crystallized and seeing where the trends are going. And what I found over the last 2.5 years of doing this is that there's a whole group of people out there in the tech world that they don't know who I am, they don't know who my company is. They may not know, many of you, they don't come out of medical schools, but they're going to challenge, they're going to solve the world's problems. Now, will they? I don't know. Maybe some of them will, but I think what's going to happen is they're going to bring some fresh ideas to the mix. So I think this whole issue of sourcing the crowd, bringing other people in here. So what I do is I create partnerships. I leverage what people can do best and bring them into an early stage to kind of create something new. We work with a lot of accelerators around the world, and one of our key programs is what we're trying to do is bring that startup model in-house, because there's so much technology that's out there. The technology is happening, at least on the digital space. We just don't know what to do with it all. It's really how you deploy that technology, what are the business models around that technology. Those are really more of the challenging areas for me as working at BD and also being concerned with the overall providing better health care within our country and the world. So I just think to be able to mobilize those folks, we also have a program at Singularity University, if any of you have heard of that, which addresses big global challenges and takes them from a very different set of ideas and doing design sprints around this. You know, what I've seen people create in a matter of 10 weeks is just simply amazing, but they have to be kind of given permission, many people, especially in the corporate world, to do that. We've been fortunate in putting a small startup team out there on the West Coast in the heart of Silicon Valley and really saying, you know, don't use the rules that we use within a big company. I mean, I think the comments that the gentleman from J&J said earlier, I mean, we're right on. But it's not just a matter of taking technology, it's really a matter of thinking differently, doing things differently, and believing, allowing to fail, and because some of these are going to take hold.
Ms. Cryer, how do patients and patient advocates approach these initiatives?
Well, I think we approach them in ways that we just discussed. So much of what Dr. Hite was mentioning in his remarks is really the world that I live in now as a patient advocate and as the leader of a patient advocacy organization. As you can see, I'm wired and wearable already, and it was the reason that we created the Global Liver Institute as an innovation and collaboration hub, not as something to create necessarily new initiatives or programs. And so when I think about not only the question you just posed me, but the questions that have been posed, and look back across the past 8 years of this administration, we've seen fabulous initiatives that give a sense of excitement for those of a patient, for those from the patient community. And I do have IBM on my board. We have been out to Apple and to Google. I know organizations like the American Heart Association has a very large investment and program with Google, with Verily. So I think the patient advocacy organizations, those who have the urgency of the everyday, of how do we solve the problem for me right now, we have been seeking those novel approaches and those novel ideas. And I think that in taking stock, I went back and spent a few days rereading a lot of the books that most of us here are mentioned in or referenced in or helped write, whether they're by Dr. Emanuel or Senator Daschle or Stephen Brill or now Daniel Dawes, and those are now becoming history books. I know it's a strange thought because it's the times that we have lived through. So I think in terms not so much of individual initiatives, but how are we going to bake in the new principles and the ways of working that we've created over these 8 years. And those principles, first and foremost, have been about involving patients and patient advocates and patient advocacy organizations, 3 different things I would mention, in novel ways, in ways where we're not seen just as the beneficiaries of care, but as the stewards of innovation and as partners and peers in not only entering into clinical trials, but designing the trials, and of identifying the problems as well as helping the solution. So I think that what we need to take stock of and what we need to make sure happens in the next few months is that the ways of collaboration, the methods of data-driven prioritization rather than who has the loudest voice or who has the biggest lobby, but what has the greatest impact on our public health and what has the greatest impact on our overall productivity and health as a nation and health as an economy needs to be what's driving the frameworks and principles for how we continue to move forward.
Great. And then Dr. Danaher, how does the education sector and also the publishing sector approach the initiatives?
Sure, and I'll go back to the initial question about have we made the right bets, et cetera. So I'm from Elsevier. Many of you know us from our publications, Lancet, in Cell and from our textbooks, Brunwald and Netters, et cetera. And we also provide decision support tools to researchers, to scientists, to clinicians, ScienceDirect, Scopus, SciVal, et cetera. 25 years ago, I had the privilege of working for Dr. Sullivan at HHS. And we were asking these same questions. Were we making the right bets? And how could we make the national research agenda less reactive, more proactive, and how could we ensure that it wasn't affected by the political process? And how could we make sure that funding was robust and continued strongly going forward? And it was a very political time. Dr. Fauci led the leaders coming to advocate and to champion funding for HIV research and AIDS. And what I realized then, and I think what we realized, is it was less about were we picking the right initiatives. Clearly there were some things we had to fund, and it was more about how do we ensure that our nation's research agenda could be understood by the American people, and how could we make sure we demonstrated those metrics of success. And so what I would say is that there's lots of opportunities going forward. I think whether we fund Alzheimer's research, whether we fund the Cancer Moonshot, the opportunities for us going forward is that the Affordable Care Act has changed the financing of our system. So our focus now will be less episodic, it'll be more longitudinal. The Affordable Care Act will have an impact, in my opinion, upon basic research, about clinical research, about health services research. And it's going to, as you know, a central tenet of the Affordable Care Act is patient engagement, patient involvement. And I believe those changes will allow us to engage the American public in a meaningful discussion about their health, both for chronic conditions and chronic diseases, but also in the pursuit of wellness, and to have them participate in understanding our research priorities and where the funding is going. So those would be how I would respond to your initial question of have we made the right bets and have we done the right things?
Great. Thank you. Dr. Cordova, NSF has benefited mightily from many of these initiatives. How do you view them, and would you have changed anything?
We've been really thrilled to be a part of the President's and the White House's initiatives on things like the BRAIN Initiative, the Cancer Moonshot, and advanced manufacturing, and so on. And what we've learned by being an engaged partner is just how important partnerships are in all of this, especially in the times of really tight budgets. And I would say, in my experience, there's not been a time that, like the present, in which the whole word partnerships has taken on a new meaning. It's not about a superficial just doing the same thing, but in different ways among various organizations. But it's about real, true engagement in looking at what are your unique strengths as a private foundation or federal agency or research institute, and what can you uniquely contribute to these grand challenges. And so that's I think, leveraged what we can do in times of really tight funding. So that's one thing I've learned. And the other is that, so we've taken a cue from the White House's big initiatives, and we've looked at our own agency. National Science Foundation funds all of science and engineering, except for biomedical research directly, but indirectly we do a lot of biology research. And where are the holes, where are the gaps, what kind of big initiatives can we foresee that we're already funding at a lower level but need to go to the next level? So we've identified 10 big ideas for future investment. 6 of those are research areas that are really ripe for investment. And 4, interestingly, are process ideas, big ideas. Because as a federal agency, what you're really trying to do is figure out where your investment should be made. Where's the best place? Because we're not doing the research ourselves. It's everybody out there that's got the great ideas. And how do we get more ideas to take off and really go to the next level? And what are we doing now that's actually hindering or putting obstacles in the way of those going to the next level? So 4 of our big ideas are actually how to change as a federal agency and adopt wholly new practices. I'll just mention one because it's familiar, I think, to everybody in this room, and that's the idea of convergence. Recently, MIT rolled out a big convergence plan at the National Academies on health and how to bring together all the disciplines to attack health in new and novel ways. And so we've taken a page from that, and we're trying to apply the theme of convergence and coming together in new ways to everything we do, to all of science and engineering. So I think that as was started by Tony and then all the way up through the line, that these big initiatives have encouraged us to think in new ways. And that's arguably, I mean, the goals are very important, but also the process and the approaches, how you get there, is equally important.
Perfect. And so I think each of you touched on funding gaps, and I actually want to circle back to Dr. Fauci. So the past 4 or 5 years, we've had major international outbreaks of infectious disease, Ebola, Zika. What gaps do you see in terms of research and development for drugs in those emergency situations?
Well, that's a question we're struggling with right now, and I think it's important because many of us, myself included, and Tom Frieden has spoken about that, and others, about the need to not have to rely on the standard appropriations process when you need to respond to an emergency situation. I think I can't imagine anybody in the room has not been following the most extraordinary experience we're going through, which is we're trying to address a pandemic that's unfolding in front of us, and we don't have any resources for it. And what's evolving now is just really extraordinary, where we're taking money from other accounts. If you look at just the NIH, and the CDC is in exactly the same boat, when we made a decision, which was a good decision, that we were going to address in a very aggressive way the unfolding Zika outbreak, we decided that we needed to do certain things. The NIH had to do a few things, but one of the most important was the development of a vaccine. The CDC had to do things in the public health arena of partnering with the state and local health authorities. We didn't have any money, so we took money from other accounts. I took money from accounts that I was going to spend in the summer in malaria, tuberculosis, influenza, and I got to a certain point where we went to the preclinical and a vaccine. Then I had to start a phase 1 vaccine, which we did on August the 2nd. And I didn't have any money, so Secretary Burwell transferred Ebola funds to the tune of $47 million to allow me to start a phase 1 trial. When you start a phase 1 trial, then you have to go in and prepare the sites for a phase 2 trial. And in order to do that, you need money. So we didn't have any money. So then she had to do something which was very painful for her. She had to take money away from cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and mental health to give me money to prepare the sites for the phase 2 trial that we're going to start in January and February. So now it's September, we're running out of the fiscal year, and unless we get an appropriation for the fiscal year, which begins in a few weeks, I'm going to have to do the unthinkable. I'm going to have to stop the vaccine trial endeavor, which is, I think, historically unprecedented. So if you're asking me what the gaps are, the gaps are that we have a broken process that doesn't allow us to respond to emergent situations. Whether the solution is to have an emergency public health fund so that you can go and tap it immediately to do the things that we need to do, as opposed to getting involved in appropriation process, which when it works right, it can be very efficient. But when you get political aspects involved with it, it essentially stops on a dime and nothing happens. So I think what we're experiencing right now should be a lesson for all of us, that what we're going through right now in our response to Zika is just really unconscionable, but it's happening.
Right. Ms. Cryer, you wanted to follow up?
I just wanted to say that to reinforce Dr. Fauci's point, to making our health leaders jump through hoops to respond to emergency after emergency is truly unconscionable. But when I think about how we look forward to really think about where the funding allocation should go, where the gaps truly exist, we haven't made investments in two areas that are crucial. One is in surveillance. So we don't really have a handle on what problems we have as a nation in terms of our health. So making effective decisions about allocations of funds is based on insufficient data, to put it lightly. The second lack of investment that we have made is a lack of investment in predictive analytics. So we haven't used the data that we have to really project and to look forward and to see where our investments will make the biggest impact, not only where they should have been yesterday, but where they need to be today, tomorrow, 10 and 20 years from now. And I think if those were two concerns and two priorities, that we would do a better job, and I think folks like Tony's jobs would be a little easier.
Is it just up to public funders to create these emergency funds, or does the private sector play any?
Not at all. I think that the most exciting thing would be creating not only the partnerships that Dr. Cordova talked about so much, and that were mentioned among large companies and that we see in this room, but really creating an entrepreneurial ecosystem. We can't crowdfund our way out of this, but I think that really utilizing everyone's talents, and small companies, large companies, looking at advocacy organizations differently, who are now, through Faster Cures and through other things, funding research as well, and looking at all players, all hands on deck, and thinking about funding partners in new ways is an important aspect as well.
I would just comment on Dr. Fauci's comments. I came to Washington 25 years ago believing that social policy drove the national research agenda and health policy decisions, and I left believing that economics and finance and the political process is really what dictates it. And I say it to you because, hearkening back 25 years ago, in the time of ACT UP and HIV and research, et cetera, not having frameworks to be able to think through and gain consensus about how much do you fund breast cancer research, how much do you fund AIDS research, how much do you put as a rainy day fund for Zika or for Ebola, et cetera. I think that as much as that ability to do, for the government to do cost-benefit analysis, cost-effectiveness analysis, et cetera, and to have a structured way of doing it, I think is one of the reasons that we run into these problems. You can, to a certain extent, you can never have enough money to when a crisis occurs, but I think the absence of those decision-making frameworks was something that I was very much struck by. And in the absence, then it becomes very political.
Let me talk about a funding gap at the other end of the spectrum completely. I think responding to crises and urgent needs is really important. But there is another end of that spectrum, and that is stability in funding. For the fundamental research to go forward requires a public statement and support for risky research that has a reasonable high chance of failure, but if successful, can really have a big impact. And we know so little about biological processes and therefore disease processes that we have to maintain that strong base of basic research in the way that Tony started talking about it in his first comment. And to do that requires a recognition that fundamental research, curiosity-driven research, high-risk research, does not operate on an annual calendar or a quarter-over-quarter calendar. And so it really is the federal government that must support that kind of work. The private sector can't support it at that level. And in recognizing that it doesn't operate on an annual calendar the way that the federal budget does. There has to be some thought given to being able to assure the basic scientists that are pursuing those questions that their funding will be sustainable. And thinking about that in a new way, I think, is something that would really serve the process very, very well. To be able to give that kind of assurance that the federal government is placing, and the public are placing that kind of trust in the really high innovation scientists across the spectrum, whether it's technology or molecular biology or health services, across the board. It will make a huge difference in the ability to advance that kind of work.
So just the issues around budget are certainly not isolated to the public sector. We're right in the middle of budget season right now, so I know these challenges as far as being able to maintain funding for innovation type activities. But one of the adds I'd just like to make to some of these issues is the value of data. And I don't want to overlook that, is that so much is going on now. So many companies are investing dollars in purely for the data to come back. And I've been interested, too, to find out that some of the organizations are very reluctant to share data. They think they have a very valuable resource. So I think unless there's some ways and maybe some new models and stuff to stimulate some of this data sharing, I mean, I think, I don't want to say the answers are out there, but certainly if we're able to pool data from multiple healthcare systems, it's going to get us much closer to an answer than it is to just look at each isolated system. And I've seen that where IBM Watson and some of their customers, they don't share across. They want IBM Watson for their population, but it's not working across the system. So it's, I think I think there's a lot of value there. I think there's things that we could mine from the data that could create value and business opportunities that we haven't even started thinking about. So, but I agree with you that there needs to be some kind of more entrepreneurial public-private partnership early on, and not consortiums where people are all kind of arguing about who's in control, but really much more take an initiative and then give everybody their action and their piece of ownership in that, and then let them actually do something.
Dr. Cordova?
Yeah, well, Al's point is one that Vice President Biden and the President himself has spoken passionately about. The idea that approaching the cancer moonshot by sharing data is one of the big themes of that initiative. And I think that's one of the other remarkable things about our time, is that is within our grasp of being able to do that. And the whole real challenge is how to do it, and the commitment to do it, and to do it very well. There's another gap, since you asked about gaps, that is relevant to the folks here interested in and passionate about healthcare, but to every domain of science and technology, and that's the whole STEM workforce and the education gap in this country, which you just read about and can see the statistics everywhere on this. And the National Science Foundation is very much engaged not only in investing in fundamental research, but in the STEM workforce and in STEM education. And this is something that private entities are also just increasingly becoming aware of and committing resources to. And I think there's a real opportunity here to figure out who does what. And universities are, of course, changing their approaches. We have, I'll just mention one initiative. It's called NSF Includes. Includes is an acronym, and it's all about broadening participation, engaging more women and minorities in STEM fields broadly, from K through 12 and all the way up through university and beyond to the CEO of corporations. And how do we do that? Well, one agency can only invest kind of pilot money in innovative ideas. So what we've done is invite the whole country to submit their most innovative approaches. Again, looking for what haven't we thought about before? Why haven't we moved the needle? What kind of new thinking do we need to get to really broaden participation? And we had a kind of a month-long time scale for proposals. We got 600 proposals from around the country, with people like university presidents and heads of research institutes being the PIs on these. We could only select about 40 of them, and we just are naming the winners right now as pilot programs. But I think it's that kind of engagement on some of these gaps of figuring out, I mean, there's a lot more innovation, creativity out there than there is within any one of our organizations. And how do we tap into that effectively and then fund that and see where it goes and how does it scale?
And then,
Those are two areas. It's a little bit of a gratuitous comment, but those are two areas that we at Elsevier are very, very passionate about. The concerns about STEM education and the people going into research, and the significant supply and demand imbalance between nurses, doctors, and allied health professions, and what we need to provide for care. And then the other one is obviously the promise of big data in terms of unlocking and enhancing everything from precision medicine and you're right, to your earlier point that Google and others are doing it, but certainly those of us who have been committed to science and to research throughout our years are really looking to big data to provide unparalleled insights for scientists and researchers.
I think one of the things that has gone unrecognized is that patients and patient leaders are also part of that new STEM workforce. And one of the investments that we need to make is recognizing that patients need to be not only invited into the process, but to be educated and trained and nurtured in scientific method, in data, in health literacy, and a lot of other fields, so that we can work on par with our peer stakeholders in medicine and research. And so that investment in patients as part of that STEM workforce, right, where now we're sort of volunteers for the most part in that, but we are on the ground. And I think we're also the key to unlocking those data silos, because when you look at it from a patient perspective, looking at it in an institution agnostic or an initiative agnostic way, but really looking from what data is meaningful across my patient journey. And it might not be in a registry just on one particular disease or in one particular initiative, but there may be learnings from across a microbiome, across a brain, across a liver initiative, across a kidney initiative that, or infectious diseases, that we get the greatest learnings. And so I think that when looking through the eyes of patients and patient communities, you get a much more holistic and a much more collaborative way of sorting through these issues and identifying signals and areas for future research, and also adoption of innovation. Because as much as it's exciting to have the research created, I'm here today because innovation was actually adopted, and creating a national infrastructure where we can adopt innovation is as important as creating the innovations in the first place.
and so how do we stabilize funding for these innovations, for drug development, for education? Is it through these national initiatives? And maybe we could use the Cancer Moonshot as an example. You know, there's been tons of energy behind the Moonshot. There have been working groups. There's the White House Summit. But neither the House nor the Senate included funding for the Cancer Moonshot in their budget proposals. So how do we fund, I guess, these projects going forward? And this can just open it up to everybody.
So, you know, what you're saying might even be somewhat contradictory, because when you're talking about stabilization, you mean you have a commitment that is essentially an unlimited commitment. And I think one of the things we have to be careful about is that we forget about the stability of this was my response to your first question, is that underlying it all is the stability of the research funding in general, what Keith was mentioning. We have to pay very close attention to that, and sometimes when we get involved with initiatives that are blips that go up, that we forget about the importance of the long-term stability of the biomedical research enterprise. That sometimes gets lost when we're worrying about this initiative versus that initiative. I think, as I mentioned earlier, initiatives are very important because they're really catalysts for very important things. And I think, getting back to your first question, that it's really very important and gratifying that this administration has been so involved in the biomedical arena for initiatives. But looking forward, when we want to look 10, 20 years from now, we can't take our eye off the importance of the stability of the biomedical research enterprise.
And so does that start with Congress, or is that something that the White House could potentially
Well,
set
it's
up?
both. I think the whole funding of biomedical research historically over decades and decades has been a partnership between the administrations and a Congress who has been very, very supportive of the biomedical research enterprise. And then something went wrong along the way, on the way to the forum, that kind of broke down. And I don't think it's broke down on the part of administration. I think what we've had a difficulty with Congress. And I think that's one of the things we need to re-educate, is the pride that Congress has taken and should take in the support that they've given for the biomedical research enterprise. That's something that they should be very, very proud of. And I really would like to get back that energy that we had years ago. I'm looking at John Porter, who was a very important part of that years ago. And that's something that I think we should try and stimulate.
But I think that the stability, Dr. Fauci, the stability you speak of, which I couldn't agree with more, there's an onus that falls on the researchers, on the research community. And that is being able to articulate the value of the research that we do, and then being able to communicate that to the American people.
Right. Sure.
And I think that linkage, sometimes I think we don't do that as researchers, as scientists, et cetera. We can articulate well amongst ourselves the value, but transferring that, and then the Congress as representatives of the people, helping them to understand. And you're right, what's wonderful about initiatives is it consolidates everybody's thinking around almost a Madison Avenue type concept. But again, being able to, on an ongoing basis, have that dialogue with the American people, with the Congress, so that they appreciate our funding priorities, and the data that underpins it, I think, is the key to robust funding.
And just to bring together a couple of the comments up here, I think that we want not only a dialogue with the American people where scientists and clinicians talk about what they're doing in a way that will engage the public, and so they understand it and therefore support it with their representatives, but also to take ownership of the process, to be involved in it. We were talking about the importance of big data. The only way we're going to really achieve big data at the scale that is needed and the breadth that's needed is to have the public really involved and engaged, to feel that they are part of the process, and the fact that they own the process.
Yes.
The data is theirs. And if we can do that, then we can get the numbers, not just numbers, but across the diversity, addressing the disparities that are hugely problematic in our healthcare system, whether it's research or delivery, and measures of social justice that really need to be addressed that we're not addressing. And if we can get everyone involved and feel like they will gain from this process if they participate in it and own it, then it can make a difference in the ways that they talk to their representatives that could actually have an impact on the funding that we need.
Speaking of talking to our representatives, I have to go and join Tom Frieden in that building up there and speak to the Senate leadership just about what we're talking about. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, on this point, I think that a lot of people just don't know where their technology comes from, and how what went into their cell phones and their devices and their healthcare and all of that research has delivered. yesterday I was on a trip and I was just in a shuttle with 10 other people. I have no idea what they all did for a living, but we were talking, and somebody said, what do you do? And I said, I work for the federal government. And she said, boy, I think the best thing the federal government has ever done was to fund the national parks. And I thought, wow, I just thought, I didn't say aloud, I look forward to the day when somebody said, I think the best thing the federal government has ever done was to fund basic research.
Right.
So that is the challenge that we have. And it's a great challenge. And I think just like other things that have slipped away from us, that we haven't always focused and paid attention on that grand challenge. But without it and realizing and having that internalized by everybody, we are in danger of losing our leadership position in so many areas, including, space and all the competition there, as well as on the ground in manufacturing and healthcare. So we really have a page to take out of the manual of other countries that are being ever so much more aggressive in this sense, I think, than we always are.
So just to actually, perfect lead-in for me, thank you. I do a lot of work in Israel. Most of my time is spent on the road. It's either in Silicon Valley or in Israel. And Israel is certainly a country that has its varied politics, probably much more diverse than even in the United States in various views. But that's the one thing they agree upon, is how they support research, not just medical research, but also technological research in their Office of the Chief Scientist and the Ministry of Economy. I mean, I got to say, if we want to really look to a model of how to really bring academic, government, and the private sector together, look no further. They are creating hundreds of companies in a country of 6 million people every year. They are getting funding for these companies. They're certainly dealing with the educational needs too that these people need, and the entrepreneurial spirit. They have collaboration vehicles, whereas we actually get funding from the Israeli government to do collaborative research with Israeli companies and startups. I mean, it's a very easy process. I shouldn't say you got to go to apply, but good ideas get through and get funding, and it's tranched. It goes progressive, but there's a lot we could really learn from the Israelis. And in spite of politics, this is a system that continually pours out top people in the technology areas and top ideas that are ultimately being looked at globally.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you engage the base? And this will be our final question before we have the Q&A. How do you engage the base? Is it through the promotion of exciting new technologies like CRISPR? Is it through directly communicating with the public? How do you get the public and also Congress on board?
I think you need to meet people where they are. The Global Liver Institute actually spends a lot of time in Los Angeles working with Hollywood and embedding storylines about science, and I know there are other examples of that as well, for where people already get their information. Rather than asking people to come to us and to learn about research, it's really about, the onus is on us to show people how science and research already affects their lives, and how there really isn't this, it's a false dichotomy between I'm a researcher, I'm a patient. I'm both, you're both. And so I think people do understand where their technology comes from, and they're excited about it. How that applies or can apply to their healthcare, they haven't started seeing. There are great pockets, of course, of excellence in that, but it hasn't been spread equally. So I think meeting people where they are and bringing them their examples, where they're already receiving information, is the first step in bringing the public to the table in this.
I'm a big believer in form follows finance. And a big outcome of the Affordable Care Act is to focus on, as I mentioned earlier, the change from episodic to longitudinal, but also on population health management. And so key to population health management is this empowerment of patients doing more in the home. And so I think that the delivery system that that we are getting and what CMS and private insurers are reimbursing for keeping people out of the hospital, keeping them healthy, and shifting financial dollars to more incentivize patients to be involved in this discussion. So I think as part of that, I think that shift, as I mentioned, I believe that shift is going to have an influence on our basic science, on our clinical research, on our health sciences research. I think that the dollars are going to follow, and I think as part of that, we've got to help patients and individuals understand the role that they play in optimizing and managing their chronic conditions and optimizing their health.
Perfect, great. And then I want to open up to the audience for questions for Q&A, and I believe they have a couple of microphones that'll be passed around. So.
Hi, Mike Friedlander from Virginia Tech. I'd like to follow up on what Dr. Yamamoto said and Dr. Fauci, I know, has left. This whole idea from going from basic discovery and then initiatives or moonshots, it seems to me that one of the things that may work against this is the way we're organized. That is, our institutes at NIH are organized around organ systems or diseases. Our advocacy groups are organized around particular diseases. And while these are all very effective things, in a way, you kind of wonder who's the advocate for a moonshot for, I don't know, cell senescence or adaptive immunity or the life of a protein or any of those things that could have incredible impact on a whole host of disorders that would transcend those. How do we rally around a moonshot or an initiative on something really fundamental and get excited about it and get people to buy in?
So, hi, Mike. Nice to see you. I've been pretty tightly linked to the Precision Medicine Initiative and was helped to launch the report at the National Academy of Sciences that coined that phrase and enunciated what its goals were. And what that initiative, report said was that we should reorganize the way that we classify diseases, shifting from organs and symptoms to mechanisms. And the reason, as Mike was referring to, is that there's a crossover in mechanisms that cross disease boundaries. And so if we silo our efforts to study organs and symptoms as the way that the NIH is organized, that our medical schools are organized, right, then we're leaving information on the table that could help to move forward a whole spectrum of efforts simultaneously. So that's great. So then you ask, or any thoughtful person would say, terrific. Well, then how do you organize it? Do you organize it according to biological processes and say we're going to have a National Institute of Cell Movement and Contact? Well, I think the scientific community would say not such a bad idea. But for the people out there that we're addressing, right, that's not so easy to understand. So I think we need to recognize that we need to be operating at multiple levels here simultaneously, and recognize that the public is concerned about specific diseases, specific ailments. They want to make sure they maintain their health. And the scientific community and research community realizes that in order to do that the best and most efficiently, we need to be understanding mechanisms at the heart of them, understanding biological and disease processes at their heart. And if we can organize our effort, organizational and funding effort, that would track to those needs and still be responsive to the concerns of the public, then I think we could really move forward.
Sure.
And as I think the professor from Virginia Tech probably knows well, because it is the university most well funded in Virginia by the National Science Foundation, that the NSF operates on a very different model. So we have a lot more flexibility with through our calls for research institutes. Every couple of years, we have engineering research centers, we have science and technology centers, we have all big data hubs, all kinds of centers that are constantly forming, and then after several years, 5 to 10 years, then they disband and then new ones form. So I think It is a very good question. I think agencies can learn from each other and how they're structured, but structure can define what you can do and what you can't do, what you're missing. And it's something that we are very seriously looking at, how to be even more flexible so that these great ideas and these new kind of initiatives that you're talking about can actually get traction. And then how do you evaluate them? How do you bring together a group of merit reviewers? Where's the expertise on something that has not been well formed in the past, that is a brand new area, to evaluate if this, where this is going to go and how much we should fund it. So it's a very interesting creative question, and I would think that that's a charge that we don't hand over to Congress, that we take on ourselves to learn how to keep re-upping the model so that we are welcoming the best creative and most innovative ideas. And I hope that that is one of the aspirations of the National Science Foundation. So thank you for the question.
The question over there, or right there. Sorry.
Yeah, hello, Luc Truijen, neurologist at Janssen. Thanks for an interesting panel. I want to come up with a question for the panel on public-private partnership. Dr. Lauritano mentioned about the unique things Israel is doing that we are very well aware of. And certainly the US has some very successful public-private partnerships ongoing, like ADNI, for example, in my field. But wanted to know what your thoughts are on actually, rather than having a public partnership being an outcome of a question asked, install a mechanism that de facto is public-private and attract questions to it, such like we have in Europe with IMI, where you upfront allocate budgets for public-private partnerships. So I just wanted a reflection. Is that something that could be done in the US?
That's the model for my organization. So thank you. And I think it's certainly something that is scalable and really a way to rethink how we approach questions that cross a lot of different mechanisms or disease systems, but also affect a lot of different types of people and types of organizations.
So we have another question over there.
Thank you for the panel today. I'm Aaron Misnich with the New Orleans Bioinnovation Center. We're a business incubator in New Orleans. I've only heard one mention about small business and entrepreneurship. I was wondering if you guys have any thoughts about that outside of SBIR, STTR, that kind of thing.
Well, those are very important, SBIR, STTR, and we're very proud of funding them. Earlier this morning, I was at the Alexandria Chamber of Commerce, and this was the theme of the panel discussion there. So I'll just mention one model that we started about 4 years ago at NSF, and NIH has adopted, and so has DOE now. It's called I-Corps, Innovation Corps, and it's an instructional program that translates basic research and discovery to delivery with the product, to patent, a company, in just a very short space of time. And we used the curriculum that Steve Blank at Stanford developed, and now Y Combinator in the Silicon Valley, that is their same model to get venture capitalists engaged in funding these great ideas. But we have now centers, nodes, we call them all over the country. The universities take their graduate students, their undergraduates, faculty mentors, outside consultants of business people, and it's a really great combination of business schools with engineering schools too. And they look at what is the market potential for a piece of new knowledge, a piece of discovery, and does anybody want this, and what could it look like in its final form? And some ideas, of course, die. There is no market for them, at least now. And other ones go on. I've seen young people give fabulous talks about taking I-Corps and starting companies with them. So this is something that even other countries, like the country of Mexico, Portugal, Sweden, and so forth, have adopted. And as I said, a number of the federal agencies are now doing this. It's a really fast translation program. So that's one example.
Yeah, I think it's sort of the best lubricant between the fundamental science and being able to take at least a step toward application. And I think many universities have entrepreneurship programs now. We're involved in I-Corps, and it's an area of great interest among our trainees.
But I tell you, I like to see when there's some guts by the inventors and the people who are following it who will take it out of the university and then devote their time and actually try to build a business about it. I'm doing much less with technology transfer these days coming out of universities because it doesn't help me address the commercial risk or the unknowns. Just in the last 6 months this year, from about 5 accelerator programs that BD works with, we've reviewed over 800 applications of companies that are coming into the field, coming new, that were unknown to us. And we have specific programs in place to actually take ones that we think we can help and then provide mentoring. We don't invest, we don't take their rights, but we see how they can develop. And it's not just about the technology, it's how they deploy that technology to patients, and then also to what's the business model around it. Is it sustainable?
Absolutely. And we see that role at the Global Liver Institute as helping to define problems that matter to patients, because we find that businesses that actually solve problems are better, help them define the markets, also help promote partnerships for them, for early partners to prove proof of concept, and work with the incubators as well to help them attract, support, and investors. So we think that small business is an incredible tool for and a partner for patient advocacy organizations, and it's put a point of pride that most people think that I'm based in California instead of just down the street.
So that's our time. Any final comments from the panel?
I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our host and PBS, and just mention a little story, and this goes to Donna's comment about how each of us has a role to play, especially in the public engagement with science, that I am a scientist today and at the National Science Foundation because when I was young, I saw a PBS special about neutron stars. And when I saw that, and I saw how much energy was liberated by a hypothetical marshmallow dropped onto a neutron star, and I thought, wow, how do people know that? How do they even know these stars exist? And I decided at that moment to switch from a different major, English literature, to physics. So I have to thank PBS for its engagement in science outreach.
Excellent.
Thank you. As we like to say, we're nothing without viewers like you. That applies to PBS and this panel. If you could join me in applauding our panel, it's great.